Dread Nation is a book that sounds absolutely insane on the surface, but actually reading it, it's pretty normal.
This is the introduction song. It's not very good, but it's not too long.
I liked it, though. It had a really solid character cast. It had a plot that went in a couple different directions, and I could never tell exactly what was going to happen next, but it was always exciting to read. It had a semi-interesting setting. I'll get into that in a minute. And pretty much every word, every line of the writing is just dripping with character and atmosphere, and I really, really liked that. So if you don't want to watch the rest of this, then just know, definitely recommend this to most people. So the biggest thing that I just absolutely adored about this book was the main character, Jane. Now, she is a black, or half-black, girl in this combat school where they train people to fight zombies. And in this world, in the middle of the American Civil War, zombies just started popping up all over the place, so both armies decided to stop fighting, and they actually set up combat schools for black kids and Native American kids to train them to fight. And it also gives an excuse for the main character of this book to be pretty badass without just seeming like an asshole. Now, the thing that makes Jane such a great character is not that she's a badass, really. I mean, she is, and that's cool. But it's more that, like I said before, every line of her narration is just dripping with personality. Because, like, she's very well educated, especially for a person at that time, especially for a black person at that time. Hell, she's a black woman in fucking 1880. The fact that she even knows how to read is a miracle. But she also just knows that she can't change the whole world from her position very easily. Like, it makes it clear she really resents her position at the bottom rung of society, but she also knows, like, well, complaining about it's not really going to change anything, and while she does try to change people's minds, and she does the best she can with what she's given, she doesn't give any, like, grandiose speeches or anything, which just would seem kind of preachy and annoying, and she doesn't constantly think about how dark and dirty the world is. She's just kind of like, well, this shit sucks, but I just gotta kind of deal with it and try and improve it. And that's really, really interesting and really neat to see, especially for a genre like this. She also just has a really weird way of describing things. You know, there's a couple of strange lines in this book. Well, not even strange, just like really interestingly put. Like, at one point she's explaining how zombies freeze during the winter and then they thaw out during the spring, but in warmer states they never freeze. So she says, it's always Shambler season in Dixie, and I'm just, you know, just reading that made me chuckle. And I mean, the book literally starts off with her describing her birth and how her mother was white and then she came out black and people tried to kill her over it. And I mean, just every time she describes something, it feels a little lighthearted, which is detrimental at times. I'll get to that in a little bit, but it just feels lighthearted, and you really feel like, yeah, this character's not a blank slate. She has feelings and thoughts and emotions, and you know what? I like her. And there are some other characters in this cast which are pretty good too. I mean, it's a small cast, granted, but you know, they're nice. Like, there's an inventor dude named Gideon who, admittedly, he's not in it very much, and he doesn't have a whole lot of personality, but I don't know, something about the way he talks, just the intelligent cadence in his voice, and the way he clearly respects people who deserve it and don't respect people who don't deserve it. I don't know, it's just something about it connected with me. And there's also Jane's friend Kate, who is also black, but she's really light-skinned, and so she passes for white, and they just use that to their advantage, and they start off, like, really, really hating each other, but obviously in a book like this, with them butting heads all the time, but also being forced to work together, they eventually become friends, and I liked it. It felt like genuine friendship. You know, they both have their own thoughts and desires, and they agree on some things and disagree on other things, but at the end of the day, you can tell they really do like working together, and they do like trying to help each other, and neither of them would ever let the other one down. So, you know, Kate was good, and her relationship with Jane was also really nice. There's also a dude named Jackson who's weaker, because he's just kind of like a stereotypical oh, I'm a bad boy, but Jane kind of likes me because I'm cute, and I'm just, I mean, I guess he's not annoying or anything. It's more just the cliche of his character archetype. My tolerance for it has worn extremely thin by this point, so I just the less said about it, the better. And the story for this, like I said, is really, really interesting and unique for this sort of genre. Now, the only weak part is that at the beginning, and this also ties into Jane's character a little bit, is that Jane doesn't really have a very clear-cut motivation. Now, later on, it makes it clear that she wants to go home and she wants to see her mother again and things like that. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. You know, it's not that she wants to save the world or protect the innocent, it's just she wants to go home. And I'm like, okay, that's good. But at the beginning of the story, it just sort of meanders around for a little while. And it's not that it's bad. Again, like I said, there's some interesting character development, and you see a little bit of the world, which at first was interesting. As time went on, I just sort of stopped caring. But, you know, just seeing Jane go on little adventures and investigate and figure out, ooh, something weird is going on. I wonder what the weird thing is. I don't know. Let's figure it out. Audience, do you know? No, probably not. Actually, you probably do. Like, around halfway through the book, you can figure out pretty easily, okay, that's what's going on. But just seeing all the characters try and survive through it made it still work out okay for me. And like I said, the world is a little bit interesting at first, but as you find out more about it, it just becomes a little more dull and inconsistent. Like, I mean, at this point, we have all heard the zombie story a million times. Like, even this one, which takes place, like, I don't know, 16 or 17 years after the uprising started and people have adapted to it, it's not really doing anything super new or unique with the idea. The most interesting part about it, honestly, is just that it's in a different time period than we normally have. So, like, they don't have modern technology, they don't have modern infrastructure, they don't have modern medical knowledge or scientific knowledge, you know, so they're at a little bit more of a disadvantage than people in stories like this that take place in modern day. So I guess that's kind of interesting. And I mean, we see a little bit of the political split that's still in the country, sure, but other than that, it's just America in 1880, and then there's some zombies there, and then you kill the zombies, and you know, like I said, that's not the most important aspect of the story, but it's just a little dull. And, like I said, kind of inconsistent. Like, at one point, Jane mentions that basically every city in the country is so fortified, and they're very isolated from one another to the point where they're basically their own countries. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense, but then you find out that the mayor of Baltimore is going to run for Senate in Maryland, and, well, that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because that implies that being in the Senate is a higher power than being the mayor of your own city. But if your city is basically its own country, then you should be like the president or God King or whatever of that city, and being in a Senate would just be, I don't know, it's weird, but you know, there's a couple little things like that, and at the end of the day, it didn't bother me too much, so make of that what you will. This book is also a little weak when it comes to the racism aspects and to a couple of plot twists that occur near the end of the book. Now, there's two real plot twists that happen at the end, one of which is actually pretty good, but it's not really that shocking or anything. It's just sort of like, oh, okay, I see why that happened now. The other one is a little weird, and it's written in a strange way, and I actually had to think about it for a minute before I understood what was going on, and then I also had to think about it a little bit more, and I was like, well, but does that make sense? I don't know. So, of those two, they were both kind of unnecessary, and only one of them was any good, so that was a little eh. And like I said, the racism thing, at first I really, really liked it, because it wasn't like most stories that take place in this time period where, like, all the main characters are, like, have modern morality in them. You know, they're modern people, they aren't racist, basically. But then all the villains are exactly how people would normally be back then. And in this one, like, most of the protagonists are black, so, obviously they don't have, like, a super low opinion of black people. So, yeah, that makes sense, but then there's also some side characters you can tell, like, even if they don't actively hate them, they do sort of look down on them. And there's a lot of talk of, like, scientific racism and stuff, which was very common back then, and it makes it clear that society as a whole, yeah, they do feel like this. It's not just a couple of bad apples or anything. However, it gets more muddled near the end, because then you have a lot more white characters introduced who seem to respect Jane and her friends even before they prove themselves. There's like, okay, well, they're people. Like, well, quite a lot of people back then didn't see black people as people, so it's a little weird. And they also make it very clear at one point that a lot of white people just hate Chinese people as well. And Jane, despite having never met any Chinese people, also says, well, how bad could they be? They seem like great people. And I'm like, well, a modern person would probably think that way, but back then, even if you were black and you were a victim of racism, you probably would think like, oh yeah, fuck those Chinese people. So, is this nitpicky? Yeah, definitely, but it just stands out a little bit more when, at the beginning of the book, things were very realistic to the time period, and it felt more real as a result of that, and then at the end, it's just, it falls apart a little. The action in here wasn't that great either, but, whatever. It didn't bother me that much. Like I said, the characters and the story were good enough that I just didn't care that much. And so, like I said, I'd recommend this book. It's very, very interesting. It's got some really cool main characters. It has a pretty good plot that goes in a couple different directions. Starts off weak, but gets strong later. And honestly, as much as I was harping on those couple of points at the end, they really don't distract you that much. Like, the action's not good, but it's fine. So, unless you're, like, really, really tired of zombie stuff at this point, then I'd say give this one a shot, because I liked it, and I think you will too.